Here are the top 10 historical facts about Jesus. Number 10. He was likely born in a stable. The idea of a grand entrance into the world with angels singing and a star shining is a later embellishment. In fact, Luke's gospel is the only one that mentions the circumstances of Jesus' birth. And even there, it's pretty vague. We know from history that most people in that region were poor and uneducated. So it's likely that Jesus' birth was not a big deal for most people. No, 9. He probably didn't perform any miracles. Miracles are mentioned only in the Gospels, which are religious texts. As such, they should be taken with a grain of salt. It is important to note that no one from that time period who was unbeliever recorded any of Jesus' miracles. No. 8. There is no historical evidence that he was crucified. The crucifixion is mentioned in all 4 Gospels. But again, these are religious texts written long after the fact. There are no contemporary accounts of the crucifixion outside of the Bible. Number 7. Pontius Pilate was probably not the governor at the time of Jesus' death. This is another detail that comes from the Bible. However, there is no historical record of Pontius Pilate being governor at that time. The earliest record we have of him is from a coin that was minted 5 years after Jesus' death. Number 6. Jesus wasn't called Christ. That's another detail that comes from the Bible. The title Christ wasn't used during Jesus' lifetime. In fact, it wasn't even used for 200 years after his death. The title was used by early Christians as a way of identifying Jesus as the Messiah. Mary Magdalene wasn't a prostitute. This is a common misconception that comes from a misreading of the Bible. Mary Magdalene was a follower of Jesus and one of the first people to see him after his resurrection. However, she is not described as a prostitute in the Bible. That detail comes from a sensationalist book written in the Middle Ages. Number 4. Jesus probably never met King Solomon. King Solomon is mentioned in the Bible as the wisest man who ever lived. However, there is no historical evidence that he met Jesus. The story comes from Matthew's Gospel, which was written about 70. By that time, Solomon had been dead for over 400 years. No. 3. Jesus wasn't a carpenter. That's another detail that comes from the Bible. It says that Jesus was a carpenter by trade, which is a bit odd since he would have needed to learn the trade from his father. However, there is no historical evidence that he was a carpenter. In fact, the word carpenter isn't even used in the original language. The word actually means someone who works with wood, so it could also refer to a furniture maker or a boat builder. No! 2. He probably didn't have any siblings. The Bible says that Jesus had 4 brothers, but it doesn't say that they were his full siblings. The word brother can also mean cousin or even friend in some context. And no. 1. Jesus wasn't buried in a tomb. The Bible says that Joseph of Arimathea, a member of the Sanhedrin, asked for Jesus' body and buried him in his own tomb. However, there is no historical evidence that any of this happened. In fact, the Sanhedrin would never have allowed Jesus' body to be taken down from the cross. They would have made sure that he was left there to rot. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you want to learn more.